Right, John and Joe,
Yep.
nobody can predict the future, but everyone is interested in the future, and especially the future of IR. And it's really kind of a wide open field, when you think about it. Let me just raise a couple of possibilities. Is the future of international relations going to be multipolar, bipolar, or non-polar? Is it going to be a much more integrated global community, or more fractured, maybe a regional set of institutions and politics going on? How should we think about this? Is the state going to remain the dominant actor? Are non-state actors and sub-state actors and supranational actors going to be more important? What's the terrain? What are the trends? How do you look at the future of international relations? And although none of us would have the arrogance to think we can predict it, what should be the things we're looking for? Joe, what do you think?
Well, the way I would phrase it is, what kinds of trends do we think we ought to pay attention to? And the trend that comes to my mind is regionalism. If we do move toward a world in which more states or the distribution of power is distributed across a larger number of states, then the ability, for example, of one country such as the United States to manage or to lead any particular order is going to go down. And I think we are seeing some in trade, for example, we are beginning to see some important, and we have for 2 decades, movement towards regionalism, with different agreements being developed in Asia, in the transatlantic area, and Latin America.
Let me tell you, it's a big issue. John, is
Yeah,
regionalism the thing? Is that where you place your bets?
I think there's some very interesting things going on in terms of regionalism. I don't think that will be the defining character of world politics going forward. I think that there will be the defining characteristics will be that there will be some kind of, we'll call it post-Western liberal order, defined in terms of an open system and a complex system of rules. So
why is it post-Western?
Because the biggest trend I think going on is the diffusion of power and the shift of power away from the old Western states. But that's not the same thing as a movement towards multipolarity. And let me explain. Multipolarity means a world in which there are great powers, each has its own system of lesser states that are tied to it, alliances perhaps, and a world kind of divided into multiple great power zones. What may be happening is a diffusion of power, but countries that are still in some kind of cooperative, complex relationship with each other, not run as it has been in the past by Western or American power. The rise of China may be a fact, and China may be the next great powerful state that has global reach that rivals the old American system of power, but it may not be able to build an order around it, but rather it will be integrating into an order that will have basic characteristics of openness globally and a rule-based order, in the sense that China will want to be in a system that will have the kind of infrastructure of rules and institutions to service its interests.
So it seems to me you're saying post-Western, but what you really mean is the Western order appealing to enough states that it's really still the Western order, and it's not going to be multipolar, which either means it's going to continue to be an American-dominated system, or polarity isn't something we should even focus on.
No, I think that's a wrong reading of what I said. I think that that, let me put it this way, that the future of the global system will really hinge on what we'll call middle states, that not the United States and Western Europe, and really not China either, but the vast majority of states in between them, that will, in some sense, have to decide whether they want to, what kind of order do they want to live in. China cannot, just because it's powerful, say we are going to change all of a sudden the global system, and now it's going to.
Joe, do you think this middle states are important here? And let me ask you a second question. Reflect on both of them too. Since international relations theory has emerged, however many hundreds of years ago, this polarity thing has become a way we talk about it. Is it a useful way to talk about the future of international relations?
Well, when I tried to understand the effects of polarity in outbreak of war, I wasn't very successful in seeing a very strong connection because, for example, one of the arguments about multipolarity was that it encourages miscalculations. And if you look at and that the problem with bipolarity is that it may induce overreactions. But you could say that the origins of World War I lie in the overreactions of states to one another, especially during the July-August crisis.
Okay,
so I had
fair
trouble.
enough. That's fair enough.
had trouble-
But how should we think? In other words, what kinds of terms and concepts are going to give us the most purchase? You mentioned regionalism. John's talking about middle powers and the diffusion of power.
Well, I do want to go back
Yeah.
to. I do want to speak to John's useful
Yeah.
point about the middle tier countries. I would think that would include countries like Vietnam, for example, and
But also Brazil, India,
Brazil,
Indonesia,
yes.
countries that have to decide, do we want to live in a world that is open and has kind of multilateral systems of cooperation, or do we want to move towards more regional systems, or sort of ally ourselves with a kind of anti-Western, illiberal kind of a system tied to China and Russia?
Yeah, those might not be the same things, but it
Right.
seems to me there might be a disagreement here about regional. John's saying a fundamental choice is, do we want to live in an open multilateral or a regional?
yes.
I read you as saying you think the trend might be towards the
Well,
regional.
I do see regional dynamics as being extraordinarily important.
Yeah.
So, for example, in the Asia-Pacific region, we're beginning to see countries really have to make big choices about whether to align themselves with China or to align themselves away from China, possibly with countries like Australia, Britain, and the United States. And I think we're beginning to see that. There may be a natural dynamic in which Chinese power translates into greater Chinese beliefs about their rightful place in the Asia Pacific,
But can I just
and that seems to be triggering before our very eyes the beginning of a balancing coalition against China.
see,
That will
for me-
prevent, I think, Chinese influence from spreading globally if it's in conflict with its immediate.
But that
neighbors.
also shows you the limits of regionalism, because a regionalism built around China is something that the countries, these middle states that I'm talking about, who are the judge and jury of world politics and the nature of order in the system, will not want to throw their lot exclusively into a regional system dominated by China. They want the benefit of being close to China economically, maybe politically, but they want to have an open system where they have ties, perhaps security ties outside. So
Yeah.
that limits the
Right.
regionalization.
Where they won't look, a country like India, I suspect, or a country like the Philippines, are not necessarily going to look too rapidly or readily to, for example, the UN Security Council to help them deal with the problem of China. They're not going to look at the World Trade Organization. Instead, they're going to look more towards a local or regional coalition that can check the ambitions of China. That's where I would see.
What do you think?
Mike,
You
I
see
mean,
a regional coalition?
I think what you're going to see are much more intense regional dynamics, and for reasons that you are stating, which is the diffusion of power means that no state or a combination of states can actually control the world. And that's very important. I mean, when you think about the Cold War era, we saw two states that we thought had the capacity to control major parts of the world, right? And we may be moving into a world where no state has that capacity, regardless of how powerful they are.
I think you can almost bank that is to say that no
I
state,
can bank that.
that you can bank that no state is going to be unipolar in the next, in our lifetime. There isn't a state.
Well, not just unipolar. I mean, what I'm saying is something beyond that, and I think you were saying that too, that when you're saying you don't think there's going to be multipolarity, there's not going to be some small set of states. Not only one, but some small
I
set,
think
even
it will
4 or
be
5.
more diffuse power,
Yeah.
but it's at the same time not a world that still does, not a world devoid of major states that are in some kind of relationship with each other. In the old days, in the 19th century, we talked about the concert of power. We talked about great powers working together. If there is going to be a kind of one world system, not broken into slightly almost autarkic regions, but if it's still going to be a global system with global institutions and rules and interactions, it's going to have to be a more concert-based system. It's not going to be
Okay.
governed by one state that keeps the world together as one system. It's going to be states from different regions working together at the global level to keep the system stable. It means states like Brazil, India, Indonesia, Turkey.
But you have tremendous confidence in that system because even without one state's imprimatur on it, you feel like all these middle states who have all kinds of different histories and interests and cultures are still going to like the system that we have now.
That's right, for three reasons. An order such as the one that exists today, or any order, persists for three reasons. The life cycle depends on three things. Power, are there enough states? It's not going to be one state with the power to keep the system going, but are there a concert of states that have an interest in the perpetuation?
What's the second one?
Legitimacy, that is to say, do the rules of the international system comport with the rules that states and their own domestic systems can accept as legitimate? And so democracies will want an international system that has the kind of features that resonate with what democracies believe in, or not. And then thirdly, the capacity for problem solving. Can the international order solve problems, and do states in regions still think you need to look to the global system, a concert, global institutions, whatever, for solving problems that they care about?
John, now you've got me really worried because I don't see a lot of problem solving going on at the collective level.
Well, may I
Climate
see-
change. I don't see a lot of legitimacy. What do you see?
well,
John?
But
maybe we
do
can
you see it at the regional level, or
John
do you
has
see
made
it
a-
inside of
yes.
states without a global system?
So, yes.
John has pointed out some good abstract
One side of the sword?
You said good and abstract.
forces that you might imagine would push states towards a maintenance of a global system to the extent that we can measure global system, which is a great challenge. But be that as it may, why don't we ask what are some canaries in the mine that we can look at? One might be the efficacy of the Group of 20 over the next several years. I think, John, the kind of institution that I try to think of that would embody the hopes and aspirations and expectations, causal expectations that John has articulated, might be represented by the Group of 20. Can the Group of 20 work well together to deal with a range of economic, political, environmental issues? So that might be something looking forward that students might wish to study, is the developmental trajectory of the G20. Does it do well? Does it do poorly? Is it important? Does it lose salience? That, to me anyway, would be an operational question coming out of this discussion.
Yeah, and one operational problem to think about in the context, if we're all agreeing there's a diffusion of powers, the more power it diffuses, the harder it becomes to make collective decisions.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
Group of
and
20
of course, you get greater legitimacy and more difficulty making decisions.
Yes.
Smaller numbers of states, you have decision-making capacity, but a lot less legitimacy.
Yes.
And that's I think we're stuck in the world today, sort of on that knife edge, sword edge.
Sort of.
Okay.
It's possible that a small group can be efficacious. The Group of 7 industrialized countries during the 1980s did do some interesting things in terms of international monetary cooperation. So it is within certainly the realm of possibility that an even somewhat larger group, but a larger group that's not the entire membership of the UN, approaching 200 members, but a smaller group which would include all the key countries, as we've seen G20, can become efficacious and more potent in the future. If they don't, that would suggest that some of the forces that we've been talking about are moving towards further fragmentation of world politics.
Let me ask you both a slightly different question, but one related to the future. Will religion play a much bigger role in international relations looking ahead than it has in the past? About the same or less?
Well, I think that it is likely to, in parts of the world, it's likely to play a greater role. In Europe, probably less of a role, and perhaps even in the United States, a decline. Obviously, obviously, it plays a role in animating secular divides in the Middle East. It's not a huge issue in Asia. It's not inflaming relations in South America. So I think in some places, in some ways, it is. I don't think
They're confined.
that's the axis point around which global conflict will rise. I think it's an organizing identity kind of feature that plays a role when other factors are also in play. That is to say, when states break down, when security is at stake, you go for the kind of group that is an identity formation that gives you some sense of security.
So John's broadened this from religion to identity. So we'll ask the same question about identity.
Yes, I mean, certainly one of the things that I think will be very important in the future is the incorporation of groups of people who have been previously excluded from politics. This has been the broad thrust, and this is in line with John's point. If we look at the long thrust of history, more people are more involved in politics, but many people have only become involved in politics quite in the last 100 years. Racial minorities, women, and as they become more active and more salient, more powerful, more active in politics within countries, that may change the character of politics among countries. There's feminist theory teaches us, argues that we should pay attention to the difference that might be made if women played a larger role in world politics.
Yep.
There's reasons to want to see stronger evidence for that, but I think the idea of greater democratization and incorporation of previously excluded groups in the past has made a difference. I think it'll make a difference in the
And are
future.
those differences predictable, or as more groups that were excluded become included, do we not kind of know what the implications are? How do we think about that as social scientists?
Well, I think we can ask. I think we know enough about social science to know how to ask a question. And there's an interesting literature developing on the quantitative study of whether women are more represented in decision-making positions influences the texture of foreign policies of countries. What we don't know is whether, if that were to occur in multiple countries, if that would in turn bring about a change in the character of international relations.
Fair enough.
Most of that work
Yeah.
has been on foreign policy, not on international relations. Perhaps in the future there will be opportunities to study that, and I would encourage students to do that.
So I think the important things to point out here are that even though no one knows the future, debates about the future are important because what they do is force you to think about what kind of variables or factors are most important in your understanding of world politics. And the final point I'll make is one of humility in international relations. In 1984, no one would have predicted that the Cold War was ending 5 years later. In 2004, very few people would have predicted that the world economy would be in a major crisis in 2008. So debate the future, but be careful.